essentially say anything you can do, I can do better. And when you start getting into anything you can do, I can do better, now you're actually insulting somebody else by saying your skill has absolutely no value because look, I can do it too. If you can only support creators who provide value and make you think, please consider contributing to my Patreon page the next time you watch one of my videos. Hello everybody and welcome. Today I wanted to talk about bias. Now, I do feel like I should give a little bit of a warning before I get into this topic because emotions tend to run high in this particular area of the world. So I do want to say that my goal of this video is to help, not to hurt. And if you really want to get something out of this, you may need to throw out your preconceived notions about what bias means in all its various forms and really try to listen to what I'm saying. If something I say does hurt you or does sting, that is not my intention, but if you find yourself in the position where you are feeling hurt, I recommend that you pause the video, close your eyes, focus on your breathing for a little bit, and then ask yourself why you were hurt by that statement. It's pretty vital for you to start to understand this stuff if we really want to move forward into a more peaceful, collaborative environment. And it's a challenging shift for a lot of people because none of us like to be judged, and typically, our emotions, a lot of this stuff comes down to what we think about ourselves as well. So it can really cut deep, even though it is not intended to be hurtful. So make sure to keep an eye on your emotions. Make sure that you do some internal work during this video if you run into any particular points of hurt, and refrain from commenting with hurtful statements of your own, because I know that something I might say might be hurtful to you, but it is not actually helpful to hurt me back, and I can pretty much guarantee that some of you will be able to hurt me, and that will only prevent me from moving forward to a certain degree. I mean, hopefully it won't stop me entirely. I doubt it will, but, I don't want to have to deal with that hurt either. So, I understand if you don't like this video, but I do think that the information I'm going to discuss here is important, so I decided I'm going to share it anyway. When it comes to bias has many different forms. I mean, we've got racism, we've got sexism, we've got ageism. You could even go with, people for preferences with blondes or brunettes. I mean, bias can come in any number of forms. Intelligence, financial background. I mean, we do seem to have a bias between our wealthier population and our less wealthy population. That's the whole 1%er thing, where a lot of the 99ers are looking at the 1%ers going, you guys suck. And honestly, it's a bad idea. Stop doing that. But if you're in the 99% anyway. But that is a form of bias. Bias is not limited to one group or another. It's pretty much any sort of separation from another, where you're saying, I am better than you because of this, or I prefer people like me to people like you because of this. It's separation, and when it comes to, say, racism, we call it segregation, which is a similar concept. You're separating two groups from each other. War is a prime example of segregation, because you kind of have to dehumanize your enemy and say, well, they're not really human, so you can kill them. And the reason you have to do this is because it really isn't natural for us to kill. You have to get to a really bad place in order for that to become feasible. So people who go to war need to feel like their enemy isn't really human and that it's okay for them to kill. I think a lot of the reason why people get PTSD is because they see the monster within they see how they've dehumanized somebody else, but then still recognize the humanity in them, and then see the horror that they inflicted on that other person, and then they come back traumatized at the person that they displayed. Now, the monster is within all of us. That strong desire to survive, no matter the cost, does exist in all of us. The challenge is embracing it. And I don't mean becoming the monster, I mean understanding the monster, appreciating it for what it does in your life, and then saying, but there is a better way, and then allowing your higher self or your more advanced mind, your frontal lobe, to integrate with it and kind of lead you down a more complete understanding path where you're like, I understand your aggressive desire beast, but we can still find resolution and survival through this other mechanism. Like, I'm going to listen to your messages, but I am going to guide you toward a better solution. War is an example of this as well, because war is where one person's monster or beast has taken over and forced them to do something that they probably wouldn't have done otherwise. So we go to war because we feel lack or because we are afraid. And I'm sure that any president who ever saw this video would be like, how dare you? At least any president that went to war. Because I'm essentially saying that they are fearful, insecure people. And the truth is, we all pretty much are. So it's not an insult to anybody directly. It's just a point that you need to look into and figure out where this stems from. But when we go to war, we are either looking to get something that we don't have, which is a lack perspective, or we are trying to prevent future harm by taking out the opposition now. And that's the fear response. You can look at Trump's wall as an example of this as well. Most people view the wall and go, well, that's an ego trip, and I tend to agree in that regard. But an ego trip is a fear response, where you feel like you're going to be forgotten after you die. That's a fear response. So if you are building something because your ego is telling you that you need this in order to feel okay, that is something you need to look deeper into. You know, like, why exactly am I doing this? And usually the answer is going to be because I want to be remembered. I don't want to be forgotten. I want to feel like I accomplished something. I want people to feel like I did something too. You know, I want to be looked up to, all these other things. So fear response, ego trips, these are all signs of insecurity and something you should look deeper into. Now, when it comes to my own personal life, the major form of bias that I face is actually ageism. And the reason that I face this particular issue is because I have been spouting my opinions from a very, very young age. And a lot of the time I put more thought into them and why I've developed the beliefs I have than the people I talk to. So when I say something that they can't refute, they often put up their wall and go, well, you're young, you don't know what real life is like yet. And it's very frustrating for me. Part of it is, of course, the hurt when somebody tells you that you're young and therefore stupid, and you somewhat believe it yourself. And usually that's why bias hurts, is because there's a grain of truth in belief within yourself. But the main reason why I find it frustrating when somebody says a comment like that is because you completely shut down the conversation. There is no learning after this point, because you will no longer listen to anything that I said. You already dismissed me, and now we can't go anywhere. So it effectively ends any growth in a conversation, which is really sad, because you lose out on the knowledge of the other person, and they lose out on the knowledge that you possess. And this is why it's extremely important for us to understand that every single person, no matter who they are, what they look like, where they're from, or what their life circumstances are, has something of value to offer us. That way, no matter what, Every conversation can help us grow and move forward. And this is the most important part of life, to grow and to learn. So, ageism is probably not one that many people have to deal with. More than likely, you're not as controversial with people as I am. You might be. So maybe you have gotten this too. But I doubt that most people are this controversial, and that's not me saying that I'm better or worse. It's just, it seems to be my experience, is that most people aren't as willing to poke somebody else as I am. And this could come from my childhood of aggressive behavior, and part of that stems on into now. Despite the fact that I don't hit people, I'm still fairly aggressive in my approach. I don't know why I am this way, I just am. And at this point, I've reached the conclusion that I should stop judging myself for it. The only way to actually move past it is to accept it and understand this aspect of myself and thank it for what it has done for me and how far it has gotten me in life. So, if you don't suffer with ageism, more than likely, you will have come into contact with at least racism or sexism. Now, if you're a white male, this is less common, so more than likely you are going to come in on the other side of this, where somebody has made a comment such as you're a racist because you're a white male, or because you said something that somebody else misinterpreted, or possibly even said something that you meant to be hurtful and then somebody retaliated and called you a racist for it. So even that is coming into contact with bias in a certain way. It's a little lighter version than, say, people of color will face, or women in certain circumstances will face either. That's why sexism is such a big one as well. I know that when it comes to women's rights, there are some major political fights out there. I know a lot of people that come down hard on the side of feminism, but I don't think they actually understand what they're fighting for when they do. And this is also not a judgment, so wait a little bit before you start to get all angry. So let's start with racism. Racism is essentially when you say something hurtful to somebody because of their skin tone or because of their geographic birth location. Personally, I think it has more to do with the birth location. At least that's where it initiated. It has transitioned into skin color, but at this point in our world, skin color doesn't really tell you much, because somebody of any skin tone can be from anywhere, and you have no way of knowing. But that is not to say that racism does not still exist, because it certainly does. The challenge is, though, when you are hurt by somebody else's statement, it says more about you than it does the other person. And I'll give you an example that doesn't really apply to many people. So if a woman walked up to me and said, "You have the ugliest green hair I've ever seen," it wouldn't really hurt. And the reason why, I don't have green hair. So I would either look at her with a quizzical a questioning expression, and then walk away going, "Well, that was weird, crazy lady." Or I would say, "Well, thank you, given that I don't have green hair, that I guess is a compliment." And it all depends on your world perspective. I mean, you could be insulted by that if you wanted to, but if you are insulted by that and you don't have green hair, you have some deep issues that you probably need to work on. Because, then you're taking every negative comment personally, which means you are offended by pretty much everything, and that means that you think very, very badly of yourself. So, when it comes to racism and sexism, you actually have the same issue. It's perceived inferiority. And you probably understand that to a certain extent. The problem is most people believe the perceived inferiority is on the side of the person making a blatant comment. Like, with a person of color, if you say something that they take offensively, they go, "Well, you perceive me as inferior, therefore I'm hurt, and then I will hurt you back," usually in the form of calling that person racist. I have been on the receiving end of this, and it hurts a lot when somebody calls you a racist. But there is something of value to note here. The only people who will be hurt by being called a racist are the people who actually really try not to be one. So if you're calling somebody racist, you're actually using a form of bias. You're shutting down the conversation just the same way as the person who tells me I am not allowed to have an opinion because of my age. So be wary of this. When you call somebody racist, you're doing the exact same thing to them that they just did to you within your perception. So when I say that racism and sexism is about perceived inferiority, it's usually on the part of the person receiving the bias, such as the person who is most often judged based on either their skin tone or their sex, or both. And this is quite evident because when somebody makes a comment and you automatically interpret that as negative, that actually means that you view yourself in the way that that person just described. So if somebody told me that I am, or that I should be in the kitchen cooking for my husband and pregnant with kids, if I really thought that that was something I should be doing with my life, it'd probably hurt if somebody pointed it out and I wasn't living that way, because I believe it's true and they just confirmed it to me, and my life doesn't look like that. So now I'm hurt because they just affirmed something that I kind of thought, and now I have no escape. I can't pretend that it's not true anymore. Now it's been confirmed. So when you are a victim of bias, of racism, of sexism, it usually means that you are misinterpreting something, or possibly correctly interpreting something that you believe about yourself. So if somebody called me, well, just go with any slur that somebody gives to a person of color, for example. It usually would not apply to me most of the time. And if they called me that, I'd look at them confused and be like, well, why would you say that? That's just really weird. That doesn't make any sense. Because I don't tend to think about how those things might apply to me, or how I might be affected by those comments or things like that. So I don't take it personally, because it would just be weird for somebody to say that to me. On the other hand, if one of my best friends received that comment, she might take it personally. And that's somewhat unfortunate. I mean, she has been on the receiving end of racism. I mean, her dad's been held up at airports longer than anybody else in line because of his skin tone. I mean, all these other things. So she has kind of been trained to view particular comments as racist, or to be wary of certain things because they indicate somebody who is biased against her and her family and things like that. And there is a certain grain of truth. You should probably be prepared for people that are aggressively angry or violently against you for whatever reason. But it is probably not a good idea to interpret everybody who says anything that could be taken personally as racist or as intending to hurt. It's really not helpful. Similarly, with sexism, when it comes to the feminist movement, there definitely seems to be this idea that we women need to be better at everything in the male world than men are in order to earn our place. But the only reason that you would need to be better at everything to earn your place is because you already view yourself as worse than. It's the only time you'd feel the need to prove yourself. So when we have the feminist movement, which in many ways is a very good thing, it's quite interesting that we essentially say anything you can do, I can do better. And when you start getting into anything you can do, I can do better, now you're actually insulting somebody else by saying your skill has absolutely no value because look, I can do it too. So when the feminist movement is going out there saying, well, we should have women in all of these areas performing better than men in order to prove to them that we are worthwhile individuals, I view this as a very damaging perspective, because not only do you view yourself as inferior, but you're also inflicting judgment on the other side at the same time. Unintentionally, perhaps, but you're still doing it. So, what we need to understand is that women and men are different, and that our differences are good, and not something we should be ashamed of. Once we start looking at the world through this perspective, you no longer come at things from the concept of, I need to prove myself valuable. Instead, you look at the world going, I already am valuable. Now, where do I fit? Entirely different perspective, much more beneficial. Similar to race. Instead of looking at yourself and going, well, I already am inferior, and therefore them pointing it out is just plain rude. Instead, you need to say, I already am worthwhile, and it is really dumb for them to completely shut down this conversation, given how much we can both learn from each other. But I will move on, and they will have to deal with the loss on their own, because I cannot force them to listen to me anymore. This is kind of where I want people to be. I want you to move toward, I am already valuable. I am worthwhile. I am enough. And that everything happens for the best. This is the kind of perspective that's really going to help you in life. And this is the kind of perspective that can really start to eliminate things like bias in our world, because you no longer are hurt by the slurs that people throw at you, because you no longer believe the slurs that people throw at you, which therefore means that their slurs become nonsensical. It has no reflection at all on your life and on your situation. So racism would become less and less common, and then it would actually become taboo to be biased. And the people who are biased would have some very quick backlash whenever they are, because, you know, somebody would look at them like they're crazy, and they'd be like, well, why would you say that? That's just weird. You know, it wouldn't be acceptable anymore for people to make comments like that. So I'm getting a little bit of slowdown on my camera, it looks like. So I think I'm going to end this video. That's pretty much everything I had to say to you today anyway. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. And I really hope you start to embrace your worth and your value, so that we can start, you know, working through these potential problem areas well. Definitely, if you like this video, click on the thumbs up button, click on the subscribe button and the notification bell, and then if you have positive comments or questions, or you have some ideas of what I should mention in the next video, or maybe even a follow-up to this one, definitely leave them in the comments below, and I will look at them, see what I can do. So, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed, talk to you again soon.